When an HOA president's obsession with her neighbors spiraled into arson, the community thought the fire was the end of it. They weren't prepared for the moment she came face to face with her victim in his courtroom. The bailiff's voice rang through the courtroom. All rise. Everyone stood, a hush falling over the packed room. The heavy oak doors at the back swung open and the defendant was escorted inside. Shackled at the wrists, wearing a county-issued jumpsuit, Colleen Markham shuffled toward the front. Her eyes darted from the gallery to the judge's bench, as if searching for a familiar face that might offer her comfort, but what she saw instead stopped her cold. Sitting tall in his black robe, but unsmiling, was Judge Andre Colston, the very man whose house she had burned to the ground just days earlier. The air in the room felt charged, like static before a thunderstorm. A few people in the gallery whispered, shocked at the twist of fate. Colleen's knees buckled slightly, and the deputy had to steady her as she was guided into a seat. Andre's eyes met hers. They were steady, unreadable, but behind them lingered the weight of someone who had lost nearly everything: his home, his memories, his sense of safety, because of the woman now sitting in front of him. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then, Andre's deep voice broke it. "Be seated." The benches creaked as people sat. The room was so quiet you could hear the faint click of pens from the reporters in the back. Colleen's attorney leaned in close. "Don't look at him," he whispered harshly. "Keep your eyes on me." But it was too late. The damage was done. The whole courtroom had witnessed that electric first glance between judge and defendant. What made this moment more surreal was that just a week ago, this community was debating hedges, porch lights, and parking spaces. Now it was staring at the aftermath of a hate-fueled crime that could have ended lives. From his seat, Andre maintained composure, but inside his chest was a storm. Images of that night replayed: the crackling flames, the choking smoke, the sound of neighbors yelling his name, trying to help. He remembered clutching his briefcase, one of the only things he managed to salvage, while his home collapsed into glowing rubble. And now here she was, the woman who had started with petty complaints about mailbox colors, who sneered when he waved, who filed report after report with the HOA, the same woman who decided that burning down his house was the way to make her anger permanent. Colleen shifted in her chair, her face tight with defiance, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her fear. The courtroom felt like a movie scene, but this was real life. Reporters were scribbling furiously. A neighbor in the gallery covered her mouth with both hands, shaking her head as if she still couldn't believe who was sitting where. Andre inhaled slowly, steadying himself. He knew the world was watching him now. Every decision, every word he spoke would be dissected. Could he be fair? Could he sit in judgment of someone who had tried to erase him from his own life? Colin's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty." The words hung in the air like smoke, and a ripple moved through the room. Not guilty. Everyone knew what the investigators had said. Everyone had seen the footage, the gas can left near the fence line, the security cameras that caught her car circling the block. Andre kept his face neutral, though inside he felt the sting of insult. His house had been reduced to ashes, and here she was denying it all. For a second, Colleen's eyes flicked up at him again, and Andre saw something that unsettled him more than anger, a flicker of satisfaction, as though in her mind, just forcing him into this position was a kind of victory. He pressed his lips together, folded his hands on the bench and spoke evenly. "Very well, plea has been entered. We'll proceed." In that moment the whole courtroom understood this was not just another case. It was a collision of personal loss, raw hatred, and the question of what justice really looks like when the victim is also the judge. But the truth of how things reached this breaking point wasn't born in this courtroom. It started long before, in the quiet corners of their neighborhood, before the fire, before the trial, before cameras crowded the courthouse steps. This was just another neighborhood in Wilmington, North Carolina, where families grilled burgers on weekends, kids rode bikes down cul-de-sacs, and arguments were supposed to stay small, like who forgot to take the trash bin off the street. That was the world Judge Andre Colston thought he was moving into when he bought his brick-to-story house. He had chosen Wilmington because of its mix, close to the coast, quiet enough to breathe, but with enough activity to keep life interesting. His work at the courthouse in New Hanover County was demanding, and this neighborhood promised peace. At first he blended right in. Neighbors waved, and Andre with his easy smile waved back. He was a man who believed in keeping his lawn trimmed, his porch swept, his house respectable, but he also believed a man's home was his sanctuary, and that he didn't need someone constantly peering over his fence. Enter Colleen Markham, the HOA president. To some she was the woman who kept things in order, to others she was the one who treated the HOA handbook like scripture. Short grass only, mailboxes one shade of black, no porch lights past 11 p.m. Her first encounter with Andre was over the porch light one night. As Andre was watering the plants out front, Colleen walked briskly up the driveway. Her clipboard was tucked under her arm, her lips pressed in that tight line people get when they've already decided they're right. "Judge Colston," she said, skipping pleasantries, "your porch light, it stays on too late." Andre set down the hose. "Evening to you too, Miss Markham." The light's on for security. It shuts off around midnight. Colleen shook her head. The bylaws state 11. You're disrupting the neighborhood. Andre studied her face. He'd dealt with arguments for decades, angry defendants, stubborn attorneys. But something about Colleen's tone didn't sound like someone enforcing rules. It sounded personal. Noted, he said calmly. I'll look into it. That exchange might have ended there. But Colleen wasn't one to let things drop. A week later, Andre got a letter. His hedges were above regulation height. A few days after that, another complaint landed in his mailbox. Mailbox color inconsistent with approved palette. Andre laughed it off at first. If this is the biggest problem she can find, he told his friend Marcus Lee over the phone one evening, then maybe this neighborhood is too perfect. Marcus chuckled. Man, she sounds like the type who measures grass with a ruler. She showed up. With a clipboard, I think she does. But the laughter didn't hide the truth. The letters, the visits, the stares from across the street were building tension. Andre could feel it pressing against him like humidity before a storm. Neighbors began noticing too. Linda Garvey, a retired teacher who lived 2 houses down, mentioned it at the mailbox. She doesn't bother anyone like that except you, Linda whispered, lowering her voice. It's strange. Andre shrugged. Maybe I just got unlucky. But Linda frowned. Unlucky doesn't send 3 letters in a month. Colleen's fixation grew obvious. If Andre parked his car a few inches too close to the curb, she snapped photos. If guests visited, she timed how long they stayed. Her obsession with rules began to look like something else entirely. And while some neighbors rolled their eyes at Colleen, no one spoke up at HOA meetings. She was loud, she was pushy, and frankly, most people preferred avoiding her altogether. One evening, Andre's younger sister Sharon stopped by for dinner. She noticed the pile of letters stacked on the counter. All this from the HOA, she asked, picking one up. Every single one, Andre said. Same handwriting, same signature. Sharon frowned. You're a judge. You deal with high-profile cases. Are you sure this isn't more than just rules? Andre stirred the pot on the stove, pausing for a moment. I've thought about that, but I don't want to assume the worst. I'm just going to keep calm, keep doing my thing. But Colleen wasn't calming down. Each new complaint, each glare across the yard felt like another brick in a wall she was building between them. And behind closed doors her muttering grew darker. Neighbors overheard her at HOA meetings. He thinks he's above everyone else. She snapped once, but he's not. Andre tried to live above it, focusing on his work, his family, his quiet evenings at home. But even he couldn't ignore the way Colleen's shadow seemed to creep further into his life. But as bad as it seemed, this was only the beginning, because Colleen's fixation was about to shift from annoying letters to something far more dangerous. By spring, Colleen Markham's fixation on Judge Andre Colston had become impossible to miss. It wasn't just the letters anymore. It was the way she positioned herself, always watching, always scribbling notes. Neighbors who once rolled their eyes now whispered among themselves, wondering why she had turned a neighborhood association into a personal battleground. Andre tried to take it in stride. He'd handled heated trials, defendants cursing at him, even threats on his life. Compared to that, one obsessive neighbor seemed trivial. But home is different. Courtrooms are built for conflict. Houses are built for rest. And Andre found himself waking up some mornings already tense, wondering what fresh complaint might be waiting in his mailbox. One Saturday morning, as he clipped roses in the front yard, Colleen appeared again. No clipboard this time, just a camera phone in her hand. You know the rules about yard waste, she called across the lawn, angling her phone as though gathering evidence. Andre straightened slowly, pruning shears in hand. Good morning to you too. I take care of my yard, always have. Colleen stepped closer, snapping another photo. We'll see what the board says. Andre let the silence linger, then shook his head. Miss Markham, do you really think this is how neighbors should treat each other? Her eyes narrowed. Neighbors follow the rules. Some people think they're above them. Before Andre could respond, a car pulled up. His longtime friend Victor Daniels stopping by to drop off fishing gear. Victor climbed out, tall and broad-shouldered, his easy grin cutting through the tension. What's going on here? Victor asked, glancing between the two. Colleen folded her arms, just ensuring compliance. That's my duty as president. Victor raised an eyebrow. Duty, lady. He's got the cleanest yard on this street. Her face flushed, and, without another word, she stormed off toward her house, heels clicking against the pavement. Victor shook his head. Man, she's got a problem. You'd better watch her. Andre sighed. I've been watching. I just don't want to escalate it. But Colleen was escalating it herself. Neighbors reported hearing her muttering during her evening walks, sometimes stopping in front of Andre's home to stare. She just stands there. One neighbor told Sharon, like she's waiting for him to make a mistake. The complaints grew pettier but also sharper. She accused Andre of hosting unauthorized gatherings when his sister brought friends over. She claimed his American flag wasn't properly displayed. She even filed a noise complaint when Andre's nephew practiced saxophone for school band at 5 p.m. on a Saturday. Andre finally decided to confront her directly. He walked across the street one evening and knocked on her door. When Colleen opened it, she didn't look surprised, almost as if she had been expecting him. "Miss Markham," Andre began, his voice, "even this has gone far enough. I've respected your position with the HOA, but your constant complaints are harassment. This isn't about rules anymore. This is personal." Her lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. "Personal? You think this is about you? I treat everyone the same." Andre leaned in slightly. "Then why is my mailbox the only one you check twice a week?" For a moment, Colleen's eyes flickered. Then she said flatly, "Because you don't belong here, not the way you think you do." Andre's jaw clenched. He'd heard enough. "Good night, Miss Markham." As he turned, her voice followed him. "You can wear your robe in court, Judge, but it won't protect you here." Those words echoed in his head long after he closed his front door. Sharon urged him to document everything. "Keep the letters, keep notes on what she says. If she crosses the line, you'll need evidence." Andre agreed, though part of him resisted. He wanted his home to stay a home, not another courtroom, but Colleen wasn't giving him that choice. The next HOA meeting made her hostility public. When a neighbor praised Andre for helping shovel snow off driveways that winter, Colleen cut in sharply. "Good deeds don't excuse violations," she snapped. "This community has standards, and some people think they can ignore them because of who they are." Andre didn't respond. He just looked at her, calm and silent, but her words lingered with everyone in the room. The whispers afterward weren't about mailboxes or hedges anymore. They were about Colleen and how far she was willing to go. But while neighbors debated, Colleen was already planning her next move. And this time it wouldn't be just letters or insults, it would be something far more dangerous. To understand how the conflict with Colleen hit so deeply, you have to see Andre Colston not just as a judge, but as a man. At 54, he had worked hard to build a life that balanced duty and peace. His days were filled with cases, some messy, some heartbreaking, but his evenings were supposed to be calm. Home was where he shed the weight of the robe. Andre's house in Wilmington wasn't just brick and mortar. It was the place where his late wife Janice had planted hydrangeas along the side fence, where his nephew once learned how to ride a bike in the driveway, where laughter from family cookouts carried into the summer air. For Andre, every detail mattered. The bookshelves lined with trial transcripts and history texts, the framed family photos on the mantel, the worn armchair he sat in to read before bed. This was the life Colleen was invading with her constant complaints. One evening, Andre sat at the kitchen table with his sister Sharon, who had stopped by with takeout from a local seafood spot. The scent of fried shrimp and hush puppies filled the air, but Andre hardly touched his plate. "You're not eating," Sharon said softly. Andre leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "I spend my day listening to arguments. Then I come home, and I've got another one waiting for me across the street. It doesn't stop." Sharon studied him. "You've always been calm, Andre. That's your gift. But this woman isn't just being difficult. She's targeting you. You can't ignore that." He exhaled slowly. "If I go after her legally, Sharon, it turns into a bigger mess. People will say I'm abusing my position, that I'm using the courts for personal vendettas." Sharon's eyes softened. "So what? She gets to torment you until you snap." Andre didn't answer. Instead, he glanced toward the living room window, where the faint glow of Colleen's house lights shone across the street. Later that week, his friend Victor stopped by again. They sat on the back porch, sipping iced tea as cicadas sang in the trees. Victor leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Dre, I've known you 30 years. I've seen you handle murder trials without blinking, but this lady, she's under your skin, I can tell." Andre nodded slowly. "She's not just nitpicking, Vic. There's something in her eyes. It's like she's trying to break me down, piece by piece." Victor's voice grew firm. "Then you need to protect yourself. Cameras, locks, whatever it takes. Don't let her catch you off guard." Andre took the advice seriously. He installed security cameras around the property. Not because he believed Colleen would do something extreme, but because he needed peace of mind, or so he told himself. But the cameras only captured more of what he didn't want to see. Colleen lingering on the sidewalk longer than necessary, staring into his yard, sometimes snapping photos of nothing in particular. One night Andre replayed the footage with Sharon, watching beside him. "She's obsessed," Sharon whispered. "Look at her, just standing there at midnight. This isn't normal." Andre frowned. "Obsession is one thing, malice is another. I need to figure out which one this is." Still, he tried to keep life moving. He worked his cases, he visited family, he mentored young attorneys who came through his courtroom. On Sundays he attended service at a small Baptist church where he found temporary comfort in hymns and handshakes. But no matter where he went, home loomed in the back of his mind. Home was supposed to heal him. But with Colleen circling, it felt more and more like a courtroom of its own, one where the trial never ended. One Friday evening he sat on his porch with his nephew Julian, who had just turned 16. The boy looked at the stack of letters on the table beside them. "Uncle Dre," Julian asked, "why don't you just move?" Andre looked at him, surprised by the bluntness. "Move? This is my home, Jules. I built this life here. Why should I leave because someone else can't stand me? Julian shrugged. I don't know. Just seems easier. Andre smiled faintly. Easy isn't always right. If I run from people like her, she wins. And more than that, what lesson would that teach you? Julian thought about it, then nodded slowly. Andre leaned back, staring at the fading light in the sky. He wanted to believe his words, to believe that patience and integrity would be enough. But somewhere deep inside he sensed that Colleen wasn't done. But while Andre tried to preserve his peace, Colleen was already crossing into darker territory, her frustration boiling into open hostility that would shake the whole neighborhood. By the beginning of summer, Colleen Markham's obsession had turned into hostility that could no longer be disguised as rule enforcement. Neighbors whispered about it openly now. What used to be muttered side comments about mailboxes and hedges, it had escalated into visible tension that hung over the entire cul-de-sac. One evening, Andre came home late from the courthouse. His suit jacket was slung over his shoulder, tie loosened, the long day still clinging to him. As he stepped out of his car, Colleen's voice rang out from her porch. You think you're better than us, Judge? Andre paused, keys still in hand. Across the street, Colleen leaned against her railing, wineglass in one hand, her face flushed. I've just worked a long day, Miss Markham, he said evenly. Why don't we leave it there? But she didn't. You think you can bend the rules because of who you are, but I see through it, I always have. Andre didn't answer. He walked inside, locking the door behind him. Later that night, while Sharon sat with him in the living room, they heard something hit the front door, a sharp thud. Sharon jumped up. Andre checked the porch camera footage. There it was. A small rock lying on the mat, Colleen's shadow lingering in the corner of the frame before disappearing. This is harassment, Sharon said, her voice rising. You can't just sit here and let her. Andre raised a hand. I'm documenting every word, every action, but until she crosses the line into criminal, all I have is nuisance. Sharon shook her head. It's not just nuisance, Dre. She's testing how far she can go. She was right. The testing grew bolder. Neighbors began noticing Colleen pacing near Andre's property, sometimes shouting things under her breath. One family down the street overheard her muttering, he doesn't belong here, not ever, as she walked past their yard. The real turning point came during an HOA meeting at the community center. Dozens of residents filled the room, the usual chatter about pool hours and landscaping contracts echoing through the space. Andre sat near the back, quietly listening. Colleen, seated at the front with her papers spread out, scanned the crowd until her eyes locked on him. I want to address repeated violations, she announced sharply, voice cutting through the noise. There are individuals in this neighborhood who refuse to respect our standards, who treat the rest of us like we're beneath them. Murmurs ran through the room. Everyone knew who she was talking about. Andre stayed silent, but another neighbor, Linda Garvey, stood up. With all due respect, Colleen, Linda said, Andre's done more for this community than anyone else here. He helped shovel snow last winter. He fixed my fence without me even asking. Colleen cut her off. Good deeds don't erase known compliance, she snapped. This community has standards, and some people think they can ignore them because of who they are. Andre rose slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. He didn't speak loudly, but his voice carried. I've respected this community. I've respected you, Miss Markham, but this has gone too far. This isn't about lights or hedges. This is about you and whatever grudge you've decided to carry. The room fell silent. Colleen's face twisted with anger, but she said nothing further. The meeting adjourned soon after, leaving neighbors shaken. That night, Victor called Andre. You need to watch yourself, Dre. People like her, they don't just stop, they escalate. Andre rubbed his forehead. I know. I just don't want to believe it'll go that far, but it did. Weeks later, one of Andre's security cameras caught Colleen standing at the edge of his driveway at 2 a.m. She held something in her hand, a notebook, scribbling furiously as if documenting his house in the dead of night. Andre watched the footage the next morning with a pit in his stomach. He called Victor. I think she's losing control, Andre admitted. Victor's voice was firm. She already has. Now the question is, what's she willing to do about it? Andre wanted to believe it would end at harassment, at ugly words and late-night pacing, but part of him knew Colleen was building towards something worse, something irreversible. But when the breaking point finally came, it wouldn't be a rock or a shouted insult, it would be fire. It was a humid Thursday night in late July, the kind where the air feels thick and even the cicadas seem restless. Andre had just finished reviewing notes for a sentencing hearing scheduled the next day. He left the papers neatly stacked on his desk, turned off the lamp, and made his way upstairs. Sharon had left earlier after dinner, and the house was quiet. At 2 a.m. the first sound came, a faint crackle, almost like twigs snapping underfoot. Then the sharp smell of smoke seeped into the bedroom. Andre woke with a start, coughing, his eyes watering instantly. Smoke, he muttered, disoriented. He swung his legs out of bed, but the moment he stepped into the hallway, the reality hit. Thick gray clouds were already creeping up the staircase, swallowing the air. The security alarm blared, shrill and unrelenting. Andre covered his mouth with his shirt and stumbled back into the bedroom. He yanked open the nightstand drawer, grabbed his phone, and dialed 911. His voice was hoarse as he gave the address. The dispatcher's voice was steady. "Get out of the house immediately, sir. Fire crews are on the way." Andre's heart hammered in his chest as he dropped the phone into his pocket. He crouched low, pushing toward the stairs, the heat intensifying with every second. Sparks popped in the air like gunfire. By the time he reached the front door, the flames were visible, curling along the walls, devouring photographs, paint, wood. He pushed the door open, stumbling into the night air, gasping desperately. Across the street, neighbors were already spilling out of their homes. Linda Garvey screamed his name. "Andre, over here!" She rushed forward with her husband, pulling him toward the sidewalk. Within minutes, sirens wailed, red lights painting the neighborhood. Fire engines screeched to a halt as crews leapt out, dragging hoses, barking orders. The roar of water clashing with flames filled the night. Andre stood barefoot on the curb, shaking, watching his home collapse in on itself. He clutched his briefcase, the only thing he had managed to grab before escaping. Inside were case files, nothing more. Everything else, the armchair, Janice's hydrangea notes, the framed photos, was being reduced to ash. Victor arrived 15 minutes later, having sped across town the moment he got Linda's frantic call. He gripped Andre's shoulder hard. "My God, Dre, you okay? You breathing?" Andre nodded weakly, coughing. His eyes never left the house. "She did this," he whispered. "I know she did." Victor's jaw tightened. Who else would? The whole street's been watching her lose it. Investigators worked until dawn. By daylight the fire was out, but the house was a blackened skeleton. Windows melted, roof caved in. Neighbors lingered, stunned at the devastation. A fire marshal approached Andre, clipboard in hand. "Preliminary signs point to arson," he said. "Accelerants near the fence line. We'll need to run full tests." But this wasn't an accident. Andre nodded slowly. "I already knew." 2 days later, detectives knocked on Colleen Markham's door. Surveillance cameras from Andre's property and 2 neighbors' homes had caught her car circling the block just before the flames erupted. When officers searched her garage, they found a half-empty gas can with traces matching the accelerant at the scene. The neighborhood was buzzing now, not with gossip about mailboxes or hedges, but with disbelief that someone they saw every day at the HOA meetings had taken things this far. When officers led Colleen away in handcuffs, a small crowd of neighbors gathered at the edge of the street. She didn't hang her head. She didn't cry. She stared straight ahead, her chin lifted as if daring anyone to challenge her. Linda whispered to Victor, "She looks proud of herself." Victor muttered back, "That woman's sick." Andre stood at a distance watching. His home was gone, but his composure remained. Inside, though, he felt something twist painfully, an ache deeper than loss. It wasn't just his house that burned. It was the trust that a neighborhood was supposed to represent, the fragile belief that home was sacred ground. As firefighters sifted through the rubble days later, Andre picked through what remained, pulling without a half-burnt photo of Janice and Julian at a picnic. The edges were charred, faces smudged by smoke, but he held onto it like it was gold. Victor walked beside him. "Dre, I don't even have words, but she's going to pay for this. You know that, right?" Andre looked at the ruins, then back at Victor. His voice was steady but heavy. "Justice takes time, and justice has to be fair, even for her." Victor shook his head. "You're a better man than me." Andre didn't answer. He just kept staring at what was left of his life. But as devastating as the fire was, the real shock hadn't come yet, because just days later Andre would walk into his own courtroom and see the woman who tried to erase him sitting at the defendant's table. In the days after the fire, the smell of charred wood lingered over the neighborhood like a shadow. The blackened frame of Andre's house stood as a reminder of how quickly life could collapse. But even as neighbors dropped off casseroles and bottled water, detectives were already combing through every inch of the rubble. Andre sat on a folding chair in the driveway across the street, watching investigators sift through ashes with gloved hands. He tried to keep still, but his knee bounced restlessly. His home was a crime scene now, fenced off with yellow tape. Every creak of boots on scorched wood reminded him of what he'd lost. Detective Ruben Ortiz, a stocky man with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, crouched near the fence line with his partner, Maya Dunlop. She was younger, sharp-eyed and methodical. Together they bagged soil samples and chunks of melted siding. Ortiz walked over to Andre. "Judge Colston, we found traces of accelerant along the side of the house. Whoever set this fire wanted it to spread fast." Andre nodded grimly. "I'm not surprised." Dunlop joined them, holding a small evidence bag. Inside was a melted plastic nozzle from a gas can. "We'll send this to the lab, but odds are it matches the residue we pulled." Andre took a deep breath. "And you've already looked at the footage from my security cameras?" Ortiz nodded. "Your cameras caught a dark SUV circling the block around 2 in the morning. One of your neighbor's doorbell cams confirmed the plate. It's registered to Colleen Markham." Andre's jaw tightened. "Of course it is." Dunlop glanced at him. "She's been harassing you." "Correct." Yes, for months. Letters, complaints, even threats. Ortiz scribbled on his notepad. We'll need copies of everything, the letters, any recordings you've got. If this goes to trial, we'll need to show a pattern of behavior. Andre gestured toward Sharon, who had arrived carrying a large folder. My sister's been keeping records. Sharon handed the folder to Ortiz. Every complaint she filed, every letter she slipped into his mailbox. I knew it would come to this. Ortiz flipped through the documents, his expression hardening. This is good. It paints a clear picture. Meanwhile, the neighborhood buzzed with gossip. Linda Garvey told detectives she had seen Colleen pacing near Andre's property late at night. Another neighbor, Pauline Rivers, swore she heard Colleen muttering, "He doesn't belong here." Just days before the fire, one evening Andre overheard two teenagers down the block talking. "Man, did you see the fire? That lady's crazy." Everyone knew she was after him. Their voices carried the mix of fear and fascination that tragedy always seemed to draw. Colleen, meanwhile, stayed locked inside her home, curtains drawn, blinds shut. Neighbors watched as unmarked cars came and went. When officers finally arrived with a warrant, they emerged carrying a gas can from her garage. Tests confirmed it contained the same accelerant used in the fire. The arrest came quietly but firmly. Detectives Ortiz and Dunlop approached her door in the early morning, their knock echoing in the stillness. "Miss Markham," Ortiz said as she opened the door, "you're under arrest for arson and criminal mischief. You have the right to remain silent." Colleen didn't protest. She didn't cry. She simply lifted her chin, hands trembling slightly as officers cuffed her wrists. Neighbors stood at a distance whispering, some recording with their phones as she was led to the squad car. Linda muttered, "I knew she'd snap, but burning a man's house, that's evil." Victor, standing beside Andre, crossed his arms tightly. "She's not just obsessed, she's dangerous." Andre's face was unreadable, but inside he felt a heavy pull. Watching her driven away in the back of that car, he didn't feel satisfaction. He felt hollow. That evening, Detective Dunlop called Andre with an update. "The DA's office is moving fast. Given the evidence, charges will include felony arson and possible hate crime enhancements. This won't take long to get to arraignment." Andre sat silently with the phone to his ear, staring out at the ruins of his home. "And who presides?" he asked quietly, already knowing the answer. Dunlop hesitated. "Given the docket rotation, it could be you." Andre closed his eyes, pressing his fingers against his temple. "Then we've got a problem, because justice wasn't supposed to be personal, but for him it already was." But the true weight of that problem wouldn't be felt until Colleen walked into the courtroom shackled and came face to face with the man whose life she tried to destroy. Monday morning arrived, and with it came a storm of media vans outside the new Hanover County Courthouse. Reporters clustered on the sidewalk, cameras aimed at the entrance where deputies would soon escort in the neighborhood. HOA president accused of torching her neighbor's house. Inside, the courtroom filled quickly. Residents from Andre's subdivision slipped into the gallery, whispering among themselves. Some came out of curiosity, others out of disbelief, and a few just to see justice in motion. Andre walked through the side entrance, his black robe draped neatly, his expression unreadable. He had done this thousands of times, walked into courtrooms, heard charges, weighed evidence, but never like this, never with his own pain sitting at the defense table. The bailiff's voice cut through the buzz. "All rise." The heavy wooden doors swung open. Two deputies entered, guiding Colleen Markham forward in Orange County jail attire, her wrists shackled. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to hold in the air. Andre kept his eyes forward, steady, though every fiber of him remembered the smell of smoke, the sound of his roof collapsing. Colleen looked up, and for the first time since her arrest, her eyes locked onto his. She froze mid-step, the color drained from her face. Then, just as quickly, she lifted her chin, attempting composure, though the tremor in her shoulders betrayed her. Her lawyer, Gerald Hinton, leaned in close as she sat down. "Don't look at him. Eyes on me. Do you understand?" But the entire gallery had already seen it, the instant recognition, the collision of victim and judge in the same room. Andre cleared his throat, his voice carried with the calm authority that had defined his career. "Court is now in session. Case of State versus Markham." A reporter scribbled furiously in the back row, whispering to her colleague, "The judge is the victim. This is unprecedented." Gerald rose. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I need to address the obvious conflict here. With all due respect, this case cannot move forward under your jurisdiction." Andre's hands folded tightly on the bench. "That will be noted, but until reassignment is confirmed, I will continue with today's proceedings." Gasps fluttered through the gallery. Colleen's eyes widened and she muttered under her breath, "This is a setup." Andre leaned forward, his tone firm. "Miss Markham, you will remain silent unless spoken to." The arraignment continued. Gerald stood tall, voice confident, though his client shifted uneasily beside him. "My client pleads not guilty." The words landed like sparks on dry grass. Reporters scribbled faster. Neighbors exchanged incredulous glances. Linda Garvey whispered to her husband, "Not guilty, after everything we've seen." Andre kept his expression flat, but the denial stung. His house lay in ashes. The evidence was stacked high, and yet here she was, shaking her head, refusing to admit what she had done. When the state's attorney outlined the charges, felony, arson, criminal damage, potential hate crime enhancements, the weight of it hung in the room. But what caught everyone off guard was Colleen's reaction. She smirked, just for a second, but enough for Andre to see. That flicker of satisfaction chilled him more than the fire had. During a recess, Andre retreated to his chambers, the wooden door shutting behind him with a heavy thud. He sank into his chair, head in his hands. Sharon knocked lightly before stepping in. She had been allowed back to lend him quiet support. "You don't have to do this," she said gently. "Let another judge take it." Andre looked up, his eyes tired, but resolute. "I can't just walk away. Sharon, what message does that send? That fear can chase me off the bench? That she wins twice?" Sharon's voice dropped. "This isn't just another defendant, Andre. This is personal." "I know," he whispered, "but if justice isn't tested when it's hardest, then what's it worth?" Back in the courtroom, as the session resumed, Andre adjusted his robe, lifted his gavel, and stared across at the woman who had tried to erase his life. For Colleen, the sight of him behind that bench seemed to rattle her resolve. Her smirk faded, her hands fidgeted. Whatever power she thought she held in the neighborhood had evaporated under the gravity of this setting. And yet, beneath the tension, there was something more dangerous. A sense that she still believed she could control the narrative. But the longer the trial moved forward, the clearer it became that this case was bigger than two neighbors. It was about an entire community forced to reckon with hatred, power, and the meaning of justice. The trial moved faster than anyone expected. With the evidence so clear, surveillance footage, accelerant cans, neighbors' testimony, the prosecution had little trouble laying out its case. But this wasn't just about facts, it was about perception. And perception hung heavy over every word, every glance, every pause in that courtroom. By the second day, the gallery was overflowing. Reporters from Raleigh and Charlotte filled the back rows. Local news anchors whispered updates between sessions. Even national outlets started circling, sensing the drama of a judge forced to preside over the trial of the woman who tried to burn his house to the ground. Andre, for his part, sat tall at the bench, his expression a mask of calm, but inside, his heart thudded with every detail replayed by prosecutors. When the fire marshal described how accelerant had been poured along the fence line and ignited, Andre's chest tightened. He could almost hear the crackle again, feel the smoke clogging his lungs. The defense tried to poke holes. Gerald Hinton raised questions about whether the cameras could have been tampered with, whether someone else could have driven Colleen's SUV. But the jury looked unconvinced. Each new piece of evidence tied the fire to her more firmly. Then came the witness testimony. Linda Garvey stepped up to the stand, her voice trembling at first but growing steadier. "She was obsessed," Linda said, glancing toward Colleen. "Always circling his house, always muttering about him. I told my husband something bad was coming. I just didn't think it would be this." Gerald tried to undermine her, asking if Linda had any personal grudges against Colleen. Linda shot back firmly. "My only grudge is against people who think hate gives them power." Andre kept his face neutral, but in his chest he felt a flicker of gratitude for Linda's courage. When Victor testified, his voice carried the weight of loyalty. "I've known Andre 30 years. I saw how she went after him. I told him to watch his back. I just never thought she'd set his house on fire." Colleen sat stiffly through it all, sometimes shaking her head, sometimes scribbling furiously on notes. She slid to Gerald. Her composure cracked only once, when the prosecutor played audio from Andre's 911 call. The sound of his coughing, his voice raw as he gave his address, echoed through the courtroom. For a moment her face blanched. Sharon sat in the front row every day, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. More than once her eyes filled with tears when photos of the charred ruins were shown to the jury. During a break, she whispered to Andre, "In the hallway, every picture feels like losing Janice all over again." Andre squeezed her hand gently. "We'll get through this one step at a time." But even as the trial marched forward, Andre wrestled with his role. Every ruling he made, every objection he sustained or overruled carried the weight of scrutiny. Was he being fair? Was he leaning too hard against her, too soft? Reporters speculated endlessly, dissecting his expressions, his tone, his pauses. In one tense moment, Gerald motioned for a mistrial, arguing that Andre's involvement tainted the proceedings beyond repair. Andre leaned forward, voice calm but firm. "This court will proceed as scheduled. Your motion is denied." The gavel struck, echoing through the room like a thunderclap. Whispers rippled across the gallery, but the trial pressed on. As the days stretched, the atmosphere grew heavier. Some neighbors avoided eye contact with Colleen, ashamed they hadn't spoken up sooner about her obsession. Others whispered their own fears, that maybe HOAs built to enforce rules could turn into tools for harassment when placed in the wrong hands. By the final arguments, the tension was thick enough to choke on. The prosecutor stood tall, pointing to the charred photographs displayed on easels. This wasn't about rules, she declared. This was about hate. This was about obsession turned violent. Judge Colston lost his home, but he did not lose his life. And that's the only reason we're here talking about arson instead of murder, Gerald countered with desperation. He painted Colleen as stressed, misunderstood, unfairly vilified. But the jury's faces were hard, their eyes locked on her with a mix of disbelief and anger. Andre listened, silent, his face unreadable, but inside he knew the truth. Whatever verdict came, nothing could bring back what had burned. But when the jury returned with their decision, the weight of the community's conscience would finally be laid bare. For Colleen, for Andre, and for everyone who watched hatred cross a line no one thought possible. The jury filed back into the room after just 4 hours of deliberation. The gallery stood hushed, eyes locked on the panel of men and women carrying the weight of the community's decision. Andre sat at the bench, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles whitened beneath the robe. The foreperson rose, paper in hand. We, the jury, find the defendant, Colleen Markham, guilty of felony arson, guilty of destruction of property, and guilty of aggravated harassment with hate crime enhancement. The words rippled through the room. Sharon closed her eyes, her shoulders shaking with relief. Victor exhaled sharply, muttering. Linda reached for her husband's hand, whispering a silent prayer. Colleen sat frozen at the defense table, eyes darting as if searching for a way to undo what had just been said. She shook her head, whispering, "No, no, this isn't right." Gerald touched her arm, but she yanked it away. Andre kept his composure. His voice was even practiced, but heavy with finality. Verdict has been read. Sentencing will follow. 2 weeks later, the courtroom filled again for sentencing. Colleen stood before the bench, chains clinking faintly at her wrists. Her once pressed blouses and stiff posture were gone, replaced by a weary figure in jail attire. The prosecutor spoke first, emphasizing the danger of her crime. "This wasn't an accident, Your Honor. It was deliberate. A community cannot thrive under the shadow of fear. Justice demands accountability." Gerald attempted leniency, painting Colleen as a woman overwhelmed by pressure, consumed by stress. But the words rang hollow. When it came time for Andre to speak, the room seemed to lean forward. He removed his glasses, set them gently on the bench, and looked at Colleen directly. "You burned down my home," he said slowly, his voice measured. "You destroyed years of memories. You endangered my life and the lives of my neighbors. And for what? Because you could not see me as your equal." Colleen stared at the floor, her lips trembling but silent. Andre continued, his voice steady but thick with something deeper. "I have spent my life believing in justice. I believe it should be blind, fair, and unwavering. Today I am reminded that justice is not about vengeance. It is about truth. And the truth is simple. You chose hate. You chose violence. And now you must live with the consequences of those choices." The sentence came down. 22 years in prison with eligibility for parole after 15. The gavel struck once, echoing finality through the chamber. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, microphones extended, asking for Andre's reaction. He spoke briefly, his words firm but reflective. "I lost a house," he said. "But what we all risk losing is bigger than wood and brick. We risk losing the idea that neighbors look out for one another. Hate begins small, petty complaints, sharp words, and if it's left unchecked it grows into something destructive. We cannot ignore it when we see it. We have to confront it." That night, Andre stood on the sidewalk across from the charred remains of his home. Reconstruction would take months, maybe longer. But as he stared at the empty lot where his memories once lived, he felt something shift inside. Sharon joined him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did it, Dre. You stayed true to who you are." He nodded quietly. "Justice isn't easy, but if it was, it wouldn't mean anything." Neighbors began approaching, some with casseroles again, others just to shake his hand. They thanked him, not for being a judge, but for showing them what it meant to hold steady when hate tried to push a man. "Of course." Victor clapped him on the back. "You didn't just win a case. You showed people what courage looks like." Andre smiled faintly. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing not to let fear decide what happens next." As the crowd thinned and the night grew quiet, Andre whispered to himself words he wished his late wife could hear. "We're still standing.